Thank you for that kind introduction, and thanks for all coming along anyway. So I'll start talking about this work first, Doer's Part, which was started almost 10 years to the day. My father was diagnosed with cancer of the throat, and the doctors gave him 6 months to live. So it was my idea to document that process of him deteriorating over that period, and I started with this portrait. So the plan was to do a series of portraits of him, kind of mugshots really, so not to interfere too much with him, so that we could do these symbol pictures. But I think just because the location, he lives 350 miles away from where I am here in Glasgow, so it was quite hard to do the portraits when I wanted to do them. And the other thing is I had an ending. I do have a start and an ending picture, but the ending picture is quite horrific. So I will start by showing you the end picture, and that's why I kind of changed plan, attacked on how I was going to do the sequence. So after this first sequence I did with him, I was shooting Polaroids as well, just as an exposure guide really. And there was a film called Type 55, which is a black and white film, and it comes with a negative. So I started producing these Polaroids, and it was quite amazing the way that when I left the Polaroids instead of cleaning them, I just left them on the side, and they started to deteriorate. And the deterioration was really like a catalyst for how I might take this project forward with him. So it had the effects of his deterioration on how he was going with the effects of the deterioration on the film. So it was kind of fortuitous in a way. I almost threw these Polaroids in the bin, because like I say, it was just initially an exposure guide to how we were going to work. So I carried on also doing another Polaroid. I have lots of these Polaroids actually. Some of them were so old that you didn't get an image with them. So you buy these boxes of Polaroid. They're out of date now. They were probably like 20 years out of date. And they were quite expensive to buy 10 years ago. So I don't know how much they are now, but they were like, you know, 10 quid a sheet almost. So I use these Polaroids to sort of as a kind of an empathy thing with my father. So I'm going to move along. So this sequence of images here, it's about my father in the last sort of week of his life was in a care home. So he was in a care home for quite a while, really deteriorating. And my daughter was with me, so I took this sequence of images. And my wife wrote this really nice piece about the sequence, which I'd like to sort of read out here. Yella, my wife, wrote this. It's called Slow Forward. These three pieces are called Slow Forward. So time will overtake these moments of slow embrace where past and future fold together inward. My father and daughter in a suspended moment of silent goodbye. A withering life held gently in emphatic embrace of youth that speaks without what words cannot. So I also made a film on my dad, which is, the film I made was sort of reminiscent of In Sickness and In Health. I haven't actually put it together yet because it's kind of, I mean, it was filmed 10 years ago, but it's quite upsetting to look at the footage. So I kind of would ask my father really intrusive questions like, you've got 6 months to live, or you've got 4 months to live. What does it feel like knowing you're going to die? And I was expecting some sort of revelatory answer, which was silly really to expect that from my dad. And he said, I don't want you to film me like this because it's upsetting. And after I've got this filmed when he's talking to me about this, and he also said, you know where you can shove the film. So it's quite intrusive on me doing this work with him. So I feel like I put him through quite a lot during this 6-month period because he was pretty unwell. He was fairly unwell, but his mind was pretty intact. So my dad would always bet on the horse race, on horses. He's this incredible tipster. But the unfortunate thing, he would put so little money on each horse that we'd hardly get any winnings. So when he was in the care home, and this is on the last day actually of his life, he put a bet on with 2 winners in the race. So that's quite fortuitous. And the nurses that looked after him had this they were like clambering to look after him because they realised they were putting the bets on at the betting shop for him. And he was putting 20p to win, but they were putting like 20 quid to win, you know what I mean? So they were making a lot of money, you know what I mean? And so they didn't want my dad to go, you know what I mean? They were like, oh no, your dad, he's the best patient we've ever had, you know what I mean? So, yeah, but that's the story of my father. And this is my dad's ashes. So again, using the Polaroid, and sometimes it's fortuitous and sometimes it's not. The way it behaves, it's a total hit and miss process because the film's so old.
But just thinking this big, very deteriorated Polaroid, what was the original image?
Well, there was no image, Andrew. Nothing happened on the film, so it was like, because it was a 20-year-old out-of-date film, there was no image of him on the film. And because he also had emphysema, there was a lightening to lungs on this picture. And it was kind of like, oh God, you know, this is quite fortuitous having this sort of lung-like image here. So, yeah. So they're like symbols of his illness with the throat cancer and the emphysema. In a way, that's why I used them. And the black and white images I did a lot of shots of his clothing in this sort of quite stark black and white way, which kind of harked back to the X-ray series I did years before. So they have a lot, I mean, you know, I have a lot more imagery than you see here. This is like an edit down version of the work. And I think there is that, like I say, when I was filming my father, there was a bit of like cruelty in me in a way, which I shouldn't have been doing that. But there's also that artistic side where it's a fight between one and the other, do you know what I mean? Sometimes you know, like an image, oh, I've got to take that image because it's the best thing I've ever seen. And then there's a fight against, well, you can't do it because it's intrusive, do you know what I mean? So it's a sort of, it's a battle, do you know what I mean, between the two really. So yeah, sometimes there's images that I haven't taken of him that I maybe wish I had done, and then, you know, likewise. I did want to photograph him on my birth sheet because the picture in the other room is a picture of my birth sheet. So there was an idea of actually, because it's framed up now, the birth sheet with the sheet I was born on. So there was an image of me thinking I could take that there and put the sheet over the bed, but I thought it's too precious and we might mess it up. So I kind of had him on a sheet, on his bed. So liminal, I mean, as I've got older, my perspective on life has changed. I've had 2 episodes in intensive care. So it's kind of affected me in the way I see life. I mean, I'm fairly fit and healthy, and my mind's okay. Well, many people might dispute that. And so I kind of wanted to try and create this work. It's like me grappling really with what it might mean becoming trapped between these 2 states of life and death, really. So I'll just sort of read what Alistair Foster said in the catalogue, which was really, really interesting, I think. He says, death is a threshold we cross just once, and yet if we could peer through that portal without actually entering it, what then? So this is my kind of interpretation of that. It's kind of me creating in my studio at home a kind of environment to produce work. So they're very simply done, these pictures actually. So my studio often maybe resembles a dungeon because it's got blackout curtains on and the lighting's quite harsh. But it doesn't have any implements of torture in it. Mind you, my wife would dispute that because when I play my music, she said it is torture to go in there. So I'm trying to create like almost a tribal dance in a way. These pictures are created with music on. I'm almost dancing in some respects, creating these imagery, and it's almost about. I'm trying to get into a sort of zone of trying to maybe tap into my ancestral heritage, and where I've maybe come from. So there is that inclined. The image over here really is a symbol of when I first became very ill and I was in intensive care. So it's almost like a soft bomb, in my mind. It's creating a sort of image of something exploding, but in a different way. And luckily, this was, symbolism of the first time I was in intensive care. That was in Glasgow, and I think it was about 2017. So it's my take on how I felt and what I might think of that, where life might be.
Something very ethereal about some of these. I can see how it represents being in between.
Yes, in the state of in-between, yeah.
Did you envisage how it would turn out? Is this what was in your mind, or was it purely experimental and you?
Well, it's almost like the pictures are a byproduct in a way of this, like I say, this tribal dance I was trying to do in my studio. So the pictures are, obviously I went in there with an intention, but I would say that I had no idea quite how they might turn out. I mean, there's a lot of hit and misses going on. So the good thing about, I don't think I could have done it on film because I literally shot like maybe 200 pictures per setup. Do you know what I mean? So it's such a hit and miss process. I just wouldn't have gone there on film. But shooting digitally on a digital camera, it meant I could do multiple exposures and on a timer, so that I could do loads of pictures basically. Yeah. The photography didn't interfere with the process of making them. Do you know what I mean? The camera was just there doing its thing on the tripod.
Can you talk about the selection process? Why you choose? You were saying you were shooting like 200 images in one setup. Can you talk about why you would select an image from that?
Yes, I think it was a lot of the time my face came through. So a lot of it was just practical. Oh, actually, my face doesn't look right on that. So a lot of it was like to do with that, and not so much. So there's some great shots where the imagery, the movement around it's very good, but you just see like my eye looking skew or something like that. So it just looks a bit too weird. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes. So the edit process was really to do with that, how the whole things look. I mean, yeah, I could have photoshopped some of the facial things out, but I didn't. So, and there was enough in the selection really of each time I took a photograph. I mean, I didn't always take 200, but it just gives you where I could go with it. Yeah, the sort of idea for this one, how I love those pictures of the universe. When you see a shot of a universe and it's kind of looks like it's spinning, but obviously it's massively like that. So that was the idea. I noticed my dad's hair was like that one day. I thought, oh no, I've got to do this picture. How can I get his hairstyle looking like that? And I said, whatever you do, don't get your hair cut, because I'm going to set this picture up. And it turned out sort of as well as I'd hoped, really. So this series is called Caught Between. I know the whole exhibition's also called Caught Between. This was like conceived in the first few weeks of lockdown when we had the pandemic. And I was watching a lot of TV at that stage, and there was lots of shots of hospitals and bodies coming into hospitals, people recovering, and this like vivid color really set off something in my mind, thinking, I'd done the liminal series in a very sort of black and white stark way, so I thought it'd be interesting to create a series also in vivid color. And this green was like a color that I kept seeing. The surgeons' gowns were green, a lot of the uniforms were this green, so I was kind of bringing this green that I kind of used. I got a little bit of phobia to, because I hadn't really used that color in such a simple way. I used to do album sleeves in the 80s, and it reminds me of that color in a strange sort of way. So it was like a bit of a phobia of not using it. And I thought, oh no, this is the time to go and use these gels. And I'll describe how I constructed the images soon. There's interesting, because when the pandemic was on, I was interested to hear that Shakespeare wrote many of his plays during lockdown, which was quite amazing, really. So Macbeth and one or two of his other plays was written during lockdown. There's an interesting quote from Shakespeare. Well, it's not a quote. There's a quote from Macbeth, and he says in the play, "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face," and it's quite intriguing. That sort of quote really stuck with me whilst making these images. And I don't know if you remember in the early weeks of lockdown, because we didn't know what this pandemic was doing and where it came from. And apparently Shakespeare had this thing that a lot of people blamed him for the plague, because there was a priest had said, and I'll quote the priest. He said, "The causes of the plagues is sin, and the cause of the sin is the plagues. So he was kind of being blamed for the plague. And we had a similar sort of thing early on in lockdown, because we didn't know where this pandemic was coming from or how infectious it was. So this sounds like a ridiculous quote from this priest, but I remember stuff at the time that was going around, you know, blaming all sorts of things and people on where the pandemic transmuted from. So yeah, so I'm basically doing the same with liminal, but I'm using vivid color gels to create this sort of state of mind. I mean, when my grip of, I'll just quote this, when my grip on life appeared to be loosening, I had many profound visions and experiences that linger in my memory, and here I am trying to recapture those experiences in a visual form.
That line, there's no art to find the mind's construction of fate, isn't a photographer trying to challenge that line all the time? Like this, we're seeing the mind's construction in a photograph. Yes.
Because it conjures up a certain abstract kind of image, doesn't it? For me, it conjures up an abstract image that is a construction of the face. And, I remember doing x-rays of my parents and MRIs, and it was that sort of construction of a face that also you don't know who it is from the x-ray, do you know what I mean? So there's this construction of paradox between that. And sometimes it's a bit scary, do you know what I mean? Trying to peer beyond somewhere, so that is scary. But I think also, the work is therapeutic in the way of just doing it. So it's almost, the work doesn't have to be about the process of me projecting my feelings, but it's just also can be about doing something, yeah? So being absorbed by doing something, I think, is very helpful. So. And these are done in a way very simply again. I mean, they look quite complicated maybe, but it is just colored gels, maybe about this size, greens, blues, yellows, and I'm just simply wafting them in front of my face in quite a haphazard way. There's no real plan, and I couldn't repeat any of these. That was the thing. So they're all what I get is what happens. If somebody says, oh, I want to do you a picture of me like this, it would be quite hard to reproduce because it's so hit and miss, I mean, the camera's on a tripod and there's maybe one light source, but it's just wafting around, literally wafting around like this. Yeah.
How did you really feel when you were at that threshold between life and the other side?
Shit scared, yeah. So I'm getting quite emotional now, but yeah.
I mean, although you say this is about COVID, for me this is a continuation of that liminal and these kind of dreamlike states where you are neither here nor there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really scary. I mean, a lot of the dreams I were having in those periods of being in intensive care were actually saying goodbye to people. I mean, I did have, visionary dreams of what life might be beyond, but a lot of the dreams were saying goodbye to you and the children, you know what I mean? So, very difficult period. I think the work is good because it's kind of out there, and I don't necessarily need to reflect too much on what Jelena just asked me that question. But when I start to really think about what it was like feeling in that intensive care situation, was really, really scary. Yeah, I mean, really, really scared for my life, not knowing if you're going to come out of it or not. So.
Does any of this represent sound? I was in hospital a couple of years ago, and not in intensive care, luckily, but sounds were very prominent.
Yes. Yes, that recollection of the sound in the hospital often, is, that there's a constant bleeping going on and things like that. So it's kind of, you get that magnified sound. Whenever I see a documentary on hospitals, it takes me back sometimes. So it takes me back.
Have you tried to represent sound here at all, or is it all visual?
There was part series with my father because I did film him, so there is a lot of stuff in the hospital. I mean, that was way before I had produced this work, but there is a kind of sound is very important, and I do make films. I work with a charity called Shout at Cancer, and we've done films. We're making film at the moment. We shot the trees in Hiroshima that survived the atomic bombing with the survivors of throat cancer. And it's quite ironic, actually. I'm doing this thing with filming throat cancer patients, the people that have they have a voice box. And I suppose if I'd have known that team that is probably the best in Britain that deal with that process, I might have been able to save my father. You know what I mean? Because there was a doctor when he saw my father, he just said, you're too old to rescue, so you've got 6 months to live. Do you know what I mean? But he was fit and healthy. I just thought I was very angry that they weren't going to take any further steps to help him. So they just left him basically to die. You know what I mean? With a sentence. But the team I know, I could, ironically, I could probably have had another 10 years of his life left. But we might not be standing here now. This work might not have existed. So. The work on the pillars here, what wasn't actually conceived for the show, and I'd done a series of portraits with me and my son kind of in the same space, with a space in between. And I kind of when I had the show and I looked at these pillars, I thought, I've got these pictures that I took, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and this would work perfectly in this situation. And we assumed all the pillars were the same size. And so we printed everything. Lackland fantastically printed the show, and we did these pictures all the same size, and then we got to the last pillar, which is like 2 centimeters fatter than the other. So we had a last minute panic on the day. We just before the opening, I think we just printed another one, and we managed to stick it on there. So, yeah. It's like the night, the shots of imagery of nights in cathedrals was a kind of influence on making these pictures. There is that sort of bowing and that, facing each other. Yeah. It's like a father and son. What's the connection there? What's the genetic connection? So whilst grieving the loss of my father, I made this series, and we'd gone away to Croatia, and my father just died recently, and I kind of realized that my son is probably a bit more like my father. Maybe he'd probably dispute that, but so there's a genetic link there. So I used him, and we worked together on this series called Terms and Conditions. Again, I'll just read from what Alistair Foster says in the catalogue. A photograph cannot speak of such altered states directly, but it can whisper in metaphor, suggestively, that what we might image a memory of a dream recalled from the very brink of existence. So a lot of these are, like dreamlike situations. The original plan was this is the first image in the series actually, the original plan was to do like a Buster Keaton jokey kind of silent movie thing with my son, but technically it got quite difficult to do, so I kind of went back to making stills, metaphors for the beyond, and that we tend to, maybe in the West we sort of have a big wall between life and death. There's this barrier somehow, and I kind of, having been through intensive care and seeing my father died, I feel like that gap is very flimsy. Yeah, the gap between life and death is very flimsy. And I suppose after all, doing all this sort of work, I often think, well, is there actually life after death? The answer was probably yes, maybe. I'm going to quote a well-known doctor, and his view was, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. The whole sequence probably has like 200 images, so I had to be quite selective of what I put into the sequence, and they had to work together also closely. So some of the imagery I might have in there that I wouldn't put into a book, say, or another situation. If I had the whole gallery to show this sequence, I might hang it in a different way. So there was this thing of trying to make it work in a tight space.
Are you influenced by those close to you, those who've seen your work, in terms of selection? Or is it purely you?
No, I think it is. The edit process is, well, not just me. It's Malcolm the team at street level helping me to, edit the work, because you're almost too close to any work you do, so it's quite difficult to see, how somebody else might see it. And you see pictures and it's loaded with emotion, and other people can just see it. Oh, does it work in the graphic shape in that space or not? The edit changed quite a lot on this. You know what I mean? And I was worried when I had it, because I had it laid out on a sheet, and it looked like a bit like the Forth Road Bridge, the Forth Railway Bridge, I should say. So it had like this. So I tried to sort of get out of that sequence, but actually, when we hung it, it didn't. The pattern wasn't so strong. Do you know what I mean? The pattern of it was probably better. So. But yeah, I mean, it's a kind of hit and miss sequence of doing something, not knowing. Because like I say, I've got that age that I've done a lot of things in photography, so it's quite hard to get surprises now. Do you know what I mean? So that's gave me a nice surprise. This is obviously a picture of me here, which I might not have put into this sequence. So that sequence, although they work together, I did want to feature this image in the show. Do you know what I mean? Because again, it's a reflection of that sort of going backwards and forwards between life and death to some extent, going from one sphere to another. So I kind of was interested to I have quite a lot of this sort of imagery that I've done, which is kind of like somebody said about me featuring myself in pictures, and there are a bit more where I'm kind of more prominent in the frame. They kind of link, but they're also a bit separate from this series. And it was quite good for tourists having this break with the door. So the picture with me and my dad here was taken when I had the show in Sickness and in Health, and which was 13 years ago. And my dad was here for the show. Before that show of In Sickness and in Health, he hadn't seen all the pictures I'd taken of him and my mum. So I had to sit him down and show him those pictures, and I was actually really worried that I was going to give him an edit process. If he didn't want me to put any pictures in the show, I wouldn't do it. So I sat him down, and we went through each picture, and it was quite heartbreaking for him to see his wife in such a state, but he gave me permission to show the whole sequence, which was great. And I took this photograph while the show was on, and it's almost never showed it. I never conceived it to show it in this show, to be quite honest. And I was thinking, I was going through like old stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that took 10 years ago or whatever I'd forgotten about, and I was going through my old contact sheets, and I saw this sequence, and I thought, actually, if we do it here in the same situation the photograph was taken in, it would be quite special. And also, I'm always keen to get the birth sheet, which almost doesn't feature that heavily in stuff, but I think is a really interesting piece of work. And the birth sheet is a sheet, I think, I can't be 100% sure that I was born on, but it's a sheet my parents held for years, and it was in a cupboard. And it's an interesting story, because I was actually born at home, and England were playing West Germany at the time, and it was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and my dad, in those days, fathers weren't privy to the birth of their children, they weren't in the same room, and he'd gone out to get the midwife didn't turn up, so my grandmother had to deliver me. But my dad was downstairs listening to the radio, and he said, like, you arrived when England scored their third goal against Germany. So that was quite a nice feeling to be born at the same time as England scoring a goal. So I could just imagine my dad cheering, but I don't know if he's cheering more for the goal or more for me being born. Maybe if he'd have known what he would have to put up with in all these photographs, he might have not bothered cheering me for being born, I don't know.
Can you talk a little bit about your process when you make images? Because I think your earlier work, portraits of your parents, like the staged element, and I'm a big fan of your work. I heard you talk about that series, about sort of collaborating with them, but these feel a lot more organic. But do you can you talk through how that sort of evolved, or how because there's staged elements, I think, that you kind of recreate dreams, but then the kind of more wilder images and like stuff you've done with your son?
The plan is always to set out with, total collaboration, with my son or my daughter. And there is a lot of, chat that goes on before we make an image. Because I always I always have maybe a way of, this is going to be really good if we do it in this sort of way. And sometimes those left of field suggestions are really good because it also gives me a surprise on what I thought I was going to do, but what I should be doing or what might be more interesting. So I often like that collaboration, although my daughter's a very good photographer, but it's not like it's just more a chat about something really. So I feel that creating that relaxed environment, and I did it with my parents in the parent series years ago, and it was a similar like that because, like I say, the suggestions seemed like totally stupid sometimes, and you think that's a really good idea. So I'm always open to suggestions. I always keep the process very organic. I do have sometimes I think I have good ideas, but I'm always up for influence of anybody that might have a suggestion in that.
So is this a final chapter of your exploring the family, or should we expect a project about your children?
I'm waiting for grandchildren, actually. So yeah, my kids they don't live that close anymore, really. But so I'm kind of waiting for them to have grandchildren because I've got a few ideas cooking. But you might have to wait another 10, 20 years for that. Who knows?
Are they planning to photograph you as you get older?
I don't know. I don't know if. Yeah, I'm up for that. But sometimes I often feel like my dad. What I put him through, that I might just tell him where to shove it. I don't know. Well, I'm compos mentis probably, yeah. But if I get ill, then I don't know.
With the exception of maybe a picture of your father, do you have a favourite illustrator?
That's a good question. I don't really have a favourite. It's more to do with how well the photograph works than being a favourite. Do you know what I mean? Like the seascape at the back. That is kind of. It wasn't really a favourite, but now it's become a kind of one of my favourites. And so I don't. Yeah, there's not like I prefer that picture to another. Well, I'd like to say thank you to Malcolm Dixon for letting me show this work, and everybody at Street Level. It's been an amazing team, and John for helping me with the edit process as well, and Bill for helping me hang. And I'd like to thank Lachlan Young, who expertly produced this work for me. I think without that team, I felt I was really held very tightly. Without that great team, I don't think I could have done this show like I have. I'd like to thank my kids, Miko and Nina. They're not here actually, but last and not least, I'd like to thank my dear lady wife for putting up with me. So thank you, Jelena. Cheers.